Hey everybody, how you doing? This is not going to be a long live stream. It's late, but I promised Lynn Raphael, my friend in Oakland, who is also a great accountant, um, that I would address his questions that he posted on Facebook. And I don't like to, particularly since this has to do with a matter of opining and reporting on how a terminal leaves somebody hanging when I said I was going to do what I intended to do. So here is that. This all started with a post that I wrote on Oakland News Now um, that I originally was going to do as a video, but I felt it was since it was technical, I wanted to write it out and make it so that a layperson could understand it. And I think I achieved my objective. It's technical, so I understand if there are people who are, a little concerned, confused, but this is it. And the title is Howard Terminal Ballpark Tailmare Schaaf, that Tailmare Schaaf TIF is better than impact fees for affordable housing. And this is one of those, you know, Howard Terminal posts for nerds kind of thing, right? But the old argument, I think it's appropriate to get into it by leaving up the image, is that the city of Oakland wants the Athletics to build affordable housing on the site you're looking at. This is Howard Terminal. All the buildings that you're looking at are artist renditions of what the Athletics would like to see built. There's no concrete plan to build each and every one of them, except for the ballpark itself and the event center. That's it. Now, this whole deal has degenerated into an ugly fight that need not occur if the city of Oakland had enough people who remembered how we used to do affordable housing and redevelopment and how other cities did it when we commonly used tax increment financing. In 2000, actually starting in 2010 through 2011, California Governor Jerry Brown worked to kill California redevelopment law under the idea that the state was going to save $1 billion from its enormous budget deficit. That wasn't the case. That's another story. But in killing redevelopment, he took away the ability of many cities, particularly cities like Oakland, who were not getting their fair share of investment at the time in new buildings and new housing, the ability to really have a gigantic affordable housing budget and keep Oakland affordable, even in the midst of pressures for market rate housing development that would price people out of Oakland or onto the streets. When Jerry got rid of redevelopment, what happened over the next 4 years was the gradual but steady development, thanks to his 10K program, of market rate housing that, well, did just that. Rose the market for the cost of living in Oakland, pushed a number of people out of Oakland, either out of Oakland altogether or out of Oakland onto the streets if they couldn't afford to move anywhere. And so that laid the groundwork for where we are today. Tax increment financing was introduced in this entire matter by me. April 4th of 2017, during a call that I had with Oakland Athletics President Dave Cavall, I explained to him that could use tax increment financing to provide affordable housing because I felt that the Oakland City Council would not go for Howard Terminal Ballpark without an affordable housing component. And I felt the best way to affordably do that component was through a tax increment financing district. Now, I'm not the first person to call for tax increment financing for Howard Terminal in general. That was in the Gruen and Gruen study that was written for Let's Go Oakland back in 2010. Dave Cavall had no idea that study existed. I gave him a copy after the same call that we had where I discussed the use of something called SB 628 Beal, which contains something that you might be familiar with now, enhanced infrastructure financing districts. So Dave and his staff took what I gave to him and worked with State Senator Nancy Skinner to create what is now called SB 293 Skinner, which is signed into law by California Governor Gavin Newsom on the 11th of October, 2019. And that was a special piece of legislation, is a special piece of legislation, still very much alive, of course. They just want to use it, created for what you're looking at right now. And the idea of it was centered around using tax increment financing. And what is tax increment financing? It simply says, take a look at that photograph, right? It says that the base year of assessed value, the first thing that's built, let's say it's the first thing that's built, let's say it's the ballpark and the event center. And let's say that we want to say, okay, we're going to target $2 billion in buildings to be built the first, so that they're go online the first year that we create the agency to collect the taxes in the district for tax increment financing, right? So let's say that we peg $2 billion, this ballpark at $1 billion, and then a combination of other types of buildings that would equal $2 billion. Well, over a 45-year period at a 4% rate of growth, the assessed value for that area that I'm pointing at down there, that would add up to just north of $1.6 billion by the 45th year. Since we know we can reliably forecast that will happen, because we've said, hey, look, we're going to build $2 billion worth of new structures to kick all this off for our base year assessed value, right? Because we said we're going to do that, we then form our total plan. We say, okay, we can reliably float a bond issue of $800 million. We're talking about $1.6 billion. We only use $800 million so that it makes it far less likely that we'll have, such an interruption in revenue from the money stream of tax increment from the property tax payments that the bond defaults. But here's the good news. If the bond defaults, the way the bond is structured, the athletics would pay it. Why? Because it's a private activity bond. Now, the city has a lot of options of doing it that way. I'll get to that later. But we can use part of that tax increment, and we bond it early. So you take $800 million, and then we calculate how much money we need to incentivize the athletics to build affordable housing. That was the whole idea. Saying, hey, look, we know that you want to build market rate housing because, hey, it's a popular area. You want to make money down there. We get that. But we need affordable housing. So we'll give you the difference between what you're going to charge for rents for those units and what is needed to be charged for those rents, or for some of them, to make them affordable or extremely affordable, right? That's an incentive. Now, the city wants to do it in an entirely different way. They want to charge what's called an impact fee. And an impact fee is something that Oakland had considered originally at the turn of the century, and then eventually did apply toward the second decade of the 21st century. But that was a different Oakland. When Jerry Brown became mayor of Oakland, he, because he was white and a celebrity, got rid of the institutional investor racism that plagued Oakland. White money, if you will, would leapfrog Oakland perennially. I did a study on this for the Human Rights Commission in San Francisco. I discovered what I just told you in the middle of a study called African Americans in San Francisco from 1960 to 1990. And money would leapfrog Oakland. It was obvious why. It was racism. But Jerry Brown made it okay for, more well-money white people to look at Oakland. That's just the blunt truth. And then he initiated the 10K project for market rate housing. He later said he didn't want subsidized or affordable housing in his elegantly dense Oakland. He did say that several times. All right. But the idea for redevelopment, as we used it with our state required 20% set aside of redevelopment revenue for affordable housing gave us a gigantic chunk of money to be used for affordable housing, and we used it. Again, it was an incentive for developers to build. We weren't saying, hey, look, you have got to pay this. Why? Oakland was used to developers saying we'll go someplace else. So city staff is applying impact fees, I argue, inappropriately, because you have a player in the athletics that can go someplace else. And not only that, as the person who suggested using tax increment financing to the athletics, the idea wasn't to force them to pay for something they couldn't afford. It was to make it easier to cause the development of affordable housing at and around Howard Terminal. That was the idea. But you have a group of people who want to, soak the rich now today. And rather than realizing that, look, I don't care if a person's a billionaire or whatever. First of all, you don't ask a person to spend their money to build a stadium. It's a backing, certainly, right? You need that capital backing. But the stadium and the surrounding facilities that you see are supposed to pay for themselves. That's the idea. They're supposed to pay for themselves. Okay. So, Eric, I'll get to your questions in a second. Or in a moment. Let me finish, please. But where we are is that the city again wants to apply impact fees, and there are people who want to force the A's themselves to pay for affordable housing rather than getting to negotiating and saying, okay, how much money can we give you to cause the development of X number of units of affordable housing? You see the difference in arguments? It's dramatically different, okay? And that's why the A's said, hey, you know what? We're out of here because we can't deal with this. What the city is trying to do is not what Oakland is really ready for. Oakland is not at the point where it can, in every case, successfully apply impact fees. If it could, guess what? The A's would be willing to pay them. Saying, hey, look, we'll pay them. We won't worry about tax increment financing. But the A's are the city was so forcefully trying to push this on the athletics, but it makes me wonder if the city itself understands what tax increment financing is for. And consider this, the city's consultants have not designed a bond issue. One council member said, well, we talked about doing an upfront bond issue, but see, they haven't made that public. It's not in the literature that the consultants put out. So it looks like the city is talking out of two sides of its mouth and at the same time has no idea what it's really saying. It really is a case of the blind leading the blind. All right. So that's why I wrote this, so that I wanted to crystallize the differences between the city people who want to apply the impact fees and why we have tax increment financing revenue and how it's used to help developers pay for affordable housing and make affordable housing more likely to have as a land use desired today than we've had for some time. The mayor would argue that with impact fees, they've been able to generate 628 units of affordable housing. But the bottom line is they've gotten away with that because modern Oakland has been a more desired place to develop than ever before. But we're not at the point where we can demand impact fees from everybody for any project. And we're talking about a large-scale project like Howard Terminal. You have to look at another tool in your tool shed, and that's where tax increment financing comes in. But it also crystallizes the fact that the city has not developed its cost envelope. It hasn't said, all right, here's how much money in tax increment we have and we expect. They're telling people we have to wait for tax increment to grow. You don't, if you use a different form of developing the district, You think about developing the district in terms of the value of the assessed value up front for the base year, not in terms of its shape. Think about it. The ballpark is coming in at $1 billion, and you want an extra $1 billion, and that gets you where you need to be. You're looking at right there what the A's claim is essentially $12 billion in building value. Well, I'll tell you, $1 billion that's going to come from the ballpark, which is privately financed. The A's are paying a property tax, and the event center and one or two other office or mixed-use structures with affordable housing. But you see, the A's have not in detail planned this out so that they can say with certainty that there's a development footprint of square footage that will occur during the second year, the third year, the fourth year, and so on. They've given the consultant has given us a kind of a straw person example, right? But there's nothing in the development agreement. There's no financing to suggest that these projects are certainties. And the city has allowed the A's to drive this, and to defend the A's, they really don't understand how to develop a redevelopment project area. They're learning as they go along. Again, Dave Cavall himself did not know about the redevelopment or the tax single financing legislation that I told him about April 4th of 2017. We talked on the phone. See where we're getting at? Okay. So let me get to Lynn's questions. First, let me get to Eric's comments. Eric Sterling says, Zinni, I remember when Jerry Brown said himself that he was not a sports guy. This is when the A's were talking about building a downtown park. Yeah, I don't want to get in the weeds there. I want to stay technical. And yeah, he did say that, and fine. Okay, we know that. He says, Zinni, have you heard anything about Cavall visit the A's this past week? Yes. Richard, how you doing? I want this to be a learning session. I don't want this to be a bomb throwing session where people are criticized, okay? Because there's a lot of learning here that the city needs to do. There's no critic of the city. There's a lot of people trying to play journalist, and I'm a blogger and I'm a media entrepreneur. But there are a lot of people trying to play journalists and write with this, objective tone. There are people like Chris DeBenedetti, for example, who was involved in trying to save sports in Oakland, but doesn't want anybody to know that. Says I'm a journalist, and I believe that Chris should just simply, if you will, come out and show his true colors and say, hey, look, this is what he talked about, what he did in the past, because I was on his sports entertainment task force. We need all hands. We don't need people hiding and playing and shadow boxing and stuff like that. We need everybody on deck. All right. So Linda said, didn't they try to build a stadium by Fox Theater and Sears back in the day? Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. And that's what Eric is getting at here. Okay. And what happened was that Robert Bob wanted to build a stadium. But let me come back to that, and let me address, first of all, Lynn Raphael's questions, which I do in the separate entry that I made. And again, because he had asked that I do that, that I address his concerns regarding Howard Terminal. And that's exactly what I intend to do right now, because I did work out a separate response article, if you will, response post, answering specifically his, I thought, very good questions. It's right here. So rather than have you try to read the little print, I'm going to basically talk with you as I read the answers to what I put together, and we can go forward from there, okay? But again, I want to make sure that I am answering his questions and getting to a point where we can have a great conversation about this matter, and go forward. So what Lynn said, what's going on, folks, is that I hit this, and it looks like what I'm going to have to do is get rid of it because I am trying to. Well, that does happen, doesn't it? Let me see if I can do something to get rid of this damn thing. Okay, got it. All right, got rid of that. Sorry about that, folks. It's one of these things that happens when you have too many windows open at the same time. Sometimes things get a little jammed, right? All right, so I'm going back home here so I can set this up in the appropriate read it. And there it is. And then I'll get to your other comments, Linda. So hold on. I'm going to come right back to you. But this is for Lynn. All right, Lynn, and you might be saying, all right, here it is. All right. Lynn Raphael writes, he says, Zinni, thank you for the explanation of tax increment, he says tax incentive financing is tax increment financing. And the comparison to the impact fee approach. He says, some preliminary muni real estate projects for dummies, questions, more to follow. His first question is, what are the biggest differences between the old redevelopment districts that Jerry Brown killed and TIF, which you say Nancy Skinner's legislation created? My answer is, well, Lynn, thank you for your questions. First, I never wrote that Governor Brown killed redevelopment districts. He worked to see that the termination of California redevelopment law in itself in 2011. That includes redevelopment agencies, which then form the project areas within which tax increment financing is used or can be used. Second, I never wrote or said California Senator Nancy Skinner created tax increment financing. You must understand that tax increment financing itself is a formula that can be done anywhere in the world and with property taxes, sales taxes, vehicle fees, etc. All it takes is legal authority and a municipal entity willing to use it. TIF goes back decades. And in Oakland, the Oakland Redevelopment Agency was started in 1968, and John B. Williams was its first director. If you're wondering whose bus that is at the entry to 12th Street, Oakland City Center, BART, that's John B. Williams, whose leadership formed the foundation for Oakland City Center today. Third, there are now at least 4 basic items of legislation, not 1, but 4. Betsy Lake, who was a deputy city administrator, said that enhanced infrastructure development districts were the only way essentially to do tax increment financing. The mayor echoed that. Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf. That's not true. There are 4 different pieces of legislation. Okay. First, there's SB 628 BO, which gave rise to enhanced infrastructure financing districts. SB 293 Skinner, which is designed specifically for Howard Terminal. AB 2, which allows the creation of something called community revitalization and investment authorities, all right, which allow the creation for project areas and the employment of tax increment financing within them, which is very much how we used to do redevelopment, okay? And the newest one, this is just weeks old, folks, it's called AB 464, which allows for the use of tax increment financing within enhanced infrastructure financing district, specifically for business assistance. Has the city of Oakland implemented that yet, considering all the businesses that need help recovering from the pandemic? No, but I digress, okay? That's horrifying. Another question from Lynn. Fundamentally, are impact fees paid for by the developers and possibly indirectly by market rate tenants? It's a great point. But TIFs are a shift of future real estate tax. You mentioned leases and vehicles away from the state of California and Alameda County, Oakland Unified School District, and the city of Oakland directly to pay for designated uses such as low-income housing and transportation infrastructure. So impact fees, he asked, Lynn does, are really a tax increase, but tax increment financing is really tax revenue reallocation. My answer. That's a good way of looking at it, but that does not give the full picture. Impact fees are supposed to be used in situations where the economic development planner knows there is demand for development. Impact fees allow, yes, the presentation of a kind of extra tax on development, ostensibly to get uses that normally would not be provided, like affordable housing. By contrast, tax increment financing represents the use of it, represents not so much a shift of revenues from the state of California and Alameda County and the Oakland Unified School District, the city of Oakland, but a concentration of the same in an area. I write that because the state of California, Alameda County, the school district, and the city can work out deals to get specific projects built. In other words, they say, hey, look, we know that you want out of Howard Terminal our percentage of the tax increment revenue that will be produced, which will be far greater than if there were no development, right? Okay. So knowing that, we'll make you a deal. We want you to pay for this $20 million household hazardous waste drop-off facility that would be not too far from the new housing, right? Deals like that. Okay. That's like that would be us as the redevelopment agency, as the new agency, helping the county of Alameda pay for that facility, because that's a county facility. Get it? Okay. That's the idea. So we work out deals. We say to the school district, hey, there are going to be additional kids that need school down there. So we will build you a new school or an expansion of a current one nearby, maybe in Chinatown, for example, right? In other words, tax increment financing is used to make deals and in exchange for the ability to use those revenues. Now, someone might say, well, oh, the law says you can't do that. Let me tell you something, folks. Anybody who says that does not understand and never wrote a bill. You can change a law. If you can create the argument to get the votes, you can change the law for your specific project. How the hell you think we got SB 293 Skinner to begin with? Think for a moment. Okay. So anyway, Lynn's next question is, could it be that the city staff, I thought this was an excellent question by Lynn's part, could it be that the city staff has not reviewed the A's projections for tax increment revenues to see what risk there is to the taxpayer if, say, the A's leave before the TIF back-end bonds are not repaid, or there's a major earthquake or so on? Now, my answer is no. And I said no self-respecting government should allow a private sector developer to be the framer of its tax increment financing revenue and process. That smacks of third world government legal processes controlled by outsiders, but in California. That the city of Oakland has not presented its own TIF revenue calculation should be alarming to everyone, including yourself. Economic development professionals in the city of Oakland are supposed to drive the TIF revenue process, not the Oakland A's. It's our money, not theirs. We're using it to basically assist them. That's why it's a private activity bond. That's what private activity bonds are all about. The city is using its tax money, its revenues, to assist a private developer that is allowed around the United States. All right. Another question by Lynn, clarify. Would the tax increment financing only be for the public infrastructure, but stadium, retail stores, office space, rental housing be paid with private funding and risk? Answer. The TIF process calls for a bond issue that, when formed, will be structured such that the Oakland Athletics will pay for in the event of a bond issue default. That does not mean the bond revenue stream is formed in an irresponsible way, hence my call for a 2-to-1 debt coverage ratio. I don't think I really answered this question well here. I was thinking something else. So my answer will be here, and I'll rewrite this. It should be that the TIF pays for it all. Okay, that's the idea. You're looking at a TIF that produces $800 million. You should have in your plan a way to spend for stadiums. Well, excuse me. He's saying that will the A's pay for stadiums, retail stores, office space, and rental housing. Let me be more cutting in a way not that my statement would imply. The stadium is privately financed. That's theirs. The retail stores are privately financed. Okay. The office space, privately financed. The rental housing for affordability, that's we give them a subsidy. Now, the city wants the A's to pay for affordable housing entirely. That's how that breaks down. Okay. So, in terms of the private risk, the private developer, the A's, and the A's have said they want a developer partner. They assume that risk. All right. And I have to again rewrite what I wrote to him because I was thinking entirely on something else when he asked me that question. I went south. I went left when I should have turned right. Whatever. But I corrected that one. Question from Lynn: where do community benefits agreements come into this? Are they just a variation on impact fees? Answer: the community benefits agreements are the result of a year of meetings with various members of the Oakland community regarding Howard Terminal. The problem is the city of Oakland has not given us, one, a forecasted target for TIF revenue, and two, a plan, a list of how much it's going to cost. How much is it going to cost for all of these community benefits? There's no price tag. All right. So, questions. Yes. More examples of TIF, please, and how well they worked out so far. Answer. There are thousands of examples of tax increment financing used locally and in California and America. In Oakland, tax increment financing revenue paid for the removal of crack houses in East Oakland. Oakland's redevelopment agency financed the city of Oakland's affordable housing budget such that $111 million was raised in 2011. It's last year alone. 2009, $109 million was raised the year before that. I argue that if California Governor Jerry Brown left California redevelopment law alone, okay, there would not be the giant homeless problem that Oakland faces today, or the rest of the state for that matter. Many agree with me, like Alameda County Supervisor and friend, longtime friend, Nate Miley, who was at one point Oakland Council member. Okay. So I'm going to clean up what I wrote for him. But let me get back now to, I think, your statement or your question regarding a downtown ballpark for the A's, Linda, and Oakland. I'm writing Oakland downtown ballpark, downtown Oakland ballpark, and images, and you'll see what uptown really is. Uptown Oakland, and this is okay. Let me see if I can get the StreamYard to accept this, so I can show you this. Stop screen, share. And let's see here. We've got Google. Yeah, here we go. Allow, and voila. That is it. That we're looking at, and if you're still here with us, is that footprint is that you're looking at is where Forest City Housing is now. That was there. Okay. All right, that was there. And note, if you read that image, it says Sports Business Simulations. That's my now dormant startup that contained the Oakland Baseball SimWorld game. Point is, you could actually elect to build a ballpark downtown, but you had to figure out how you wanted to finance it. Did you want to pay it out of pocket using private funds? Did you want some percentage of public subsidy, redevelopment specifically, tax increment financing specifically mentioned and calculated? All there in the game that I built and launched in 2000 with sports as part of Sports Business Simulations. I started with University of San Francisco sport management professor Dan Rasher. Okay, so in all these passing years, one of the few images of what a downtown stadium would look like and be situated is on my still active website for my dormant first startup corporation, Sports Business Simulations. So that's what you're looking at right there. Okay. On the right. And so on the, there's another image here, but Jerry killed it. And people think it's cool right here. Here's another massing image. Okay. The entertainment industry. Jerry some people think it's cool for Jerry to say, yeah, you know, he didn't like sports. But the way that I've always read that is it's like pseudo intellectual. I mean, do you dislike sports because mostly African Americans play it? I mean, these are really hard questions that people would never ask Jerry about. At that time, Jerry made a comment about wanting to kill what he called was a black political machine in Oakland. He made a lot of comments that the white media let him get away with because he's white and he's a celebrity. And they still let him get away with those comments today. Last year, in 2020, Jerry said that he didn't want subsidized housing. He didn't want affordable, if you will, housing next to his luxury restaurants downtown. That's what he said. So again, I mean, he keeps coming up with these coded comments, and the white-owned media doesn't call him on it. And this is what people are talking about when they say that racial reckoning that we're supposed to have in terms of conversation never happens. Because these comments are made and people just think, oh, that's a cool thing. It's not. Jerry Brown wasn't about city building. He was about upending Oakland, period. He wanted to do, in the modern parlance, the same kind of black removal that was done in the 60s. He just made it look cool. And this comes from a guy who actually worked on the 10K project on his behalf. The difference is that when we worked on it, we had redevelopment. We had a reservoir of affordable housing money that was getting bigger because of the market rate housing that was coming in, because of the development, all right? So we were able to build more and more affordable housing. Then Jerry became first attorney general and then governor. And then what did he do? He killed it. We didn't see that coming, all right? But yeah, I worked on the 10K project. I set up a developer symposium, had my real estate and developer friends come by my office at what's called the Dalziel building. This was February of 1999, before I was assigned to work on what became our Super Bowl bid to host the Super Bowl in Oakland. I had rearranged my office, had a gigantic open office, had a gigantic map of downtown that you could actually, it was life size. You could actually walk into it and walk in different parcels. You can see what was available and everything else. See the layout of the city. Okay. So that was, but again, there was no reason to believe that we were not going to have enough affordable housing. We were developing a shortage, yes, but the funding was getting better because our buildings, more buildings are being built, which meant what? More property tax revenue in the redevelopment area downtown. The agency collects it. The Oakland Housing Authority has more money, so we have more money for affordable housing. If that were left alone, we'd have $1 billion to spend on affordable housing alone. You hear what I'm saying? Alone. Very tragic what happened. Very tragic. So I hope that answers your. So as far as what happened with the stadium there, Linda, is that Robert Bob wanted the downtown stadium to be built. He was my boss. He was our last city manager and our first city administrator, because we changed the strong therefore government. Jerry got the electorate to back that. It's called Measure X. He created strong mayor. And so Robert wanted to build Oakland in a different way. He wasn't interested in the kind of development we have. He wanted to build a city that got Super Bowls, that was fun to be in, where you didn't have to wish to be someplace else to see a World Series or a Super Bowl. It was happening right in Oakland. Right? That was a dream that many of us shared. That's all Robert wanted. And was something he wasn't the first person to want it too. But on the, if memory serves, the 12th of May of 2002 at 12:31 in the afternoon, Jerry Brown said on a conference call, "There's not going to be a fucking downtown stadium in my city as long as I'm mayor." That's what he said. And later that same week, he fired Robert Bob. There you go. And that's what happened. That's what happened. So Eric says, Libby and our staff antagonists against business is really bad. Why would any large corporation invest in Oakland? San Jose City Council just approved to build a Google campus close to downtown. We have a problem in Oakland that, and we have people who don't understand that business, just because a business is ran by people who might have more money than they do, doesn't mean that the city should work to put the business out of business, to soak them because they're rich. This isn't something the current Oakland City Council is only stuck with. I remember now former district councilman Gessam McElhay and I were having a conversation about this. And one of our texts, and she said, well, without giving any details, she says, well, wait a minute. They have a business. That means they have money. No, it doesn't. I run a C Corp. I own 68% of my stock of our C Corp, which is a separate entity. But it doesn't mean that I'm rich. And it doesn't mean the company has a lot of money. It's a startup. Zenny 62 Media. That's true for a lot of people. But we have a lot of people who don't understand, and a lot of people my color, to be honest, who don't understand what it means to start a startup and be the majority owner of the stock within it and have an extra vehicle for someone else to invest in. It's a fundamental problem, folks. No, people don't like to talk about it, but it's a big problem of lack of education regarding how business works. And it's just, well, you're rich. So we effectively look like we're punishing someone for owning a baseball team at the same time we say we want to retain them in Oakland. It's the most illogical presentation I've ever seen in my entire life. So anyway, I'll talk more about this tomorrow. It's 3:27 a.m., but I want to make sure I got this out. I have to make some slight adjustments to what I sent to Lynn, before I presented to Lynn. I didn't send it to him yet. All right. Thank you, everybody. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com. That ends this broadcast.